Opening words for this Sunday from Anne Lamott. All these people keep waxing sentimental about how fabulously well I am doing as a mother, how competent I am, but I feel inside like when you're first learning to put nail polish on your right hand with your left. You can do it, but it doesn't look all that great around the cuticles. Unquote. So yes, it's Mother's Day, one of the most challenging of holidays. May we be grateful for the mothers we had, even if they weren't the mothers we hoped they could be. Chalice Lighting by Claudine Olivier. We light this chalice for mothers and mothering, to celebrate those who have taken on the task of nurturing a young one, baby, child, or youth, into adulthood. Also to celebrate those who have nourished the light of truth and compassion in growing hearts and minds. To celebrate those who have committed time, money, energy to the growth of others in this world. We light this chalice to celebrate and hold dear this flame of love. Unison affirmation of covenant and mission. Our covenant is to be a loving, joyful community that nurtures spiritual growth, promotes compassion, social responsibility, and service in an atmosphere of mutual trust. Our mission is to be a faith community devoted to love and respect, reason, and justice. Reading from Anne Lamott in Mom Interrupted, an essay. When my mother was alive, I felt like strangling her about half the time. The rest of the time, though, I was tender and dutiful toward her, there at her side like an aggravated bellhop throughout our 48 years together. Fortunately, I was still drinking much of that time. Later, I brought her back from Hawaii when her finances and health began to run out. I took her everywhere and tended to her daily when she got sick with Alzheimer's. She floated away on the riptide of dementia, ultimately a speck on the horizon, waving to us as long as she could to her deeply confused children on shore. Good morning, everyone. Happy Mother's Day to all of you, although I know for many people Mother's Day brings, at best, mixed feelings. Before I start, I want to thank Peggy Bell for bringing in the beautiful flowers on my right and the promise of spring that they bring to all of us. So thank you, Peggy, for doing that. Originally, about 2 months ago, I had thought of doing Mother's Day as a testimonial to two different women who were the Mother's Day founders. One of them was Sylvia Ward Howe, who was a Unitarian at that era, and the other was Anna Yervis, who was a person who was devoted to her mother, and she lived in West Virginia, although she is buried in Pennsylvania. I was going to speak about both of them more as history, but the virus has convinced me to talk about mothers in a more down-to-earth fashion, because we do have some reticence about Mother's Day, many of us. And instead of doing a historical piece, I'm going to talk a bit about Anna Yervis and Sylvia Ward Howe, but mostly talk about mothering from three different perspectives. So, first of all, I'd like to mention briefly Sylvia Ward Howe. She was, as I said, a Unitarian from Massachusetts, and she was the composer of the Battle Hymn of the Republic during the Civil War. And after that, she created a women's peace movement that she hoped would advocate and push worldwide peace in the hands of women rather than men. And if you look in the hymnal, you will find the Mother's Day proclamation that she wrote many, many years ago in an effort to create a worldwide women's movement. That peace movement never came to fruition, in part because women were focused on the suffrage movement to get women the right to vote. The other person, Anna Yervis, I said was from West Virginia, was devoted to her mother, and she also lived in the era around the Civil War. She kept pushing for an official national Mother's Day celebration every year in May, and eventually her efforts succeeded. However, she was not terribly happy with the commercialization of Mother's Day, and she is famous for one of her remarks that Mother's Day is really no good if a man brings his mother a batch of cookies or chocolates and then proceeds to eat half of them and not give any to his mother. And she thought that was a terrible idea. But she really did not like the commercialization. Both versions of Mother's Day speak, at least to me, around caring for our mothers, appreciating them even in their imperfections, and also a day for making peace. And so I've wondered in recent years whether Mother's Day might, at the heart of it, be a day where we try to make peace with our mothers or those who were mothering to us. So this morning, for a few minutes, I want to speak about three themes of motherhood. I'm going to speak from a personal perspective because I think that's the most authentic way for me to speak around this topic. There are many themes of motherhood, but I will just mention three. One is mother as guardian or lawgiver or sometimes judge. Another is mother of sorrows. And the third, and probably the most important, is a mother of love. And as I'll say later, I believe that all mothers have these three characteristics and more in varying qualities. And the problem that we, as maybe the children or the mothers of the future, is deciding which one is the most important in our lives when we remember our mothers or when we are mothers ourselves. As I said, I'm going to speak from personal perspective. I had three mothers in my life: my birth mother, my adopted mother, who I've always said is my foster mother, but she and her husband were my legal guardians. And then finally, the third mother I had was a nurse who took care of me with her family from the time I was about 6 months of age to 2.5 months of age. And each of these women, each of these mothers, had characteristics of judgment, law giving, love, and sorrow. The first woman, my foster mother, whose name was Selma, I see her largely as guardian and lawgiver and saw her that way most of her life. She lived on a farm in Maine with her husband, and she had been born in the early 20th century. When I was there, she was National Republican Committee woman from the state of Maine in the 1950s and early 60s. She was very proud of being I would say today, liberal Republican, although she wouldn't have used the L word. She was well known and admired in the state. She was, in many respects, a lawgiver. She had very little hesitation in reminding me of not only my duties as a child at the house, but also making sure I had good manners, that if I did something wrong, I would be corrected quite quickly and sometimes not in the most joyful way. And there were two words in our house that were never spoken. They were two L words. One of them was liberal. I'll mention the other one a little bit later. She also had the capacity, and you may remember this from your time if you were a mother or when you had a mother, she had the capacity to give the look, and that's with a capital L. And I'm guessing that many of us probably can remember that look that our mother could give us when we had done something wrong, or we might have said the wrong thing at the wrong time, or been rude, or if we were lying, which I did from time to time as a child, and I would get to look. So the look was pretty ferocious, but I think it was very important in my understanding of Selma as a guardian mother. One day when she was about 91, it was about a year before she died, and this would have been 2002, I believe. I was supposed to do a service at a church in Brunswick, Maine, and the farm was in Lisbon, about 10 miles away. And so Selma asked if she could come to the service with me, and I was visiting at that time from the West Coast. And I worried just a bit about her attending because I didn't know if she'd like what she'd hear, but okay, she attended. She sat at the very back of the church with her cane. She didn't want to use any hearing aids, and she was determined to fend off anyone who might want to convert her to Unitarian Universalism. I did the service, and I don't remember really what the topic was, but I think it was something around liberalism and conservatism in its old form being useful to America and its future, something like that. We decided after the service was over to go to the coast and get some lobster. And so we got in the car and we were driving. I was driving down to South Harpswell, and she was in the passenger seat with her cane held firmly in hand. And she was silent, which was unusual. And she looked at me sideways for a moment with a little bit of a look, and she said, "Did I hear the word liberal in the service?" And I stopped there and I said, "Why, yes, you heard the word liberal and conservative both being valuable in American society." And there was a silence, and she said, "Oh, I see." So I'm going to stop there around Selma, except to say that she was also a mother of sorrows. She had a lot of sorrows in her life that were very painful for her, but she was a very strong New Englander and would never talk about them. And I'm sure she carried many sorrows to her dying day. Now, my mother of love. My mother of love was a nurse in Keene, New Hampshire, where I was born and had my infancy. And Charlotte and her family lived there. They were French, they were Italian American, manufacturing family. She was a nurse. And I was taken there after a disaster in my own life at 6 months of age. And I don't remember Charlotte really well, but I did have a chance to meet her in 1991 before she died. It was the only time as an adult I'd ever talked to her. I went to New Hampshire and we talked for a long time. We went to the house where I had lived and to the house where my grandparents lived in Keene. She shared the story of my premature birth as well as a near death experience I had at 6 months of age. I had been taken away from my natural mother at that time. My father was in art school in Massachusetts, and Charlotte and her family took care of me for 2 years. The family psychiatrist for whom I am named, Leo Alexander, had recommended that I be moved yet again to be with a more higher class family on a farm in Maine, and they had run a summer children's camp for many, many years. So the couple, who were an older couple, took me on at the age of 2.5. Charlotte told me that when my grandparents came by to pick me up and take me to Maine, they asked her to come along to take care of me on the ride. She was so angry at their decision to do this move, especially at 2.5 years old, that she refused and told them that she thought it was a terrible idea. And when I talked to her in 1991, I could still see she was angry about what had happened. She still carried anger that I'd been carried away from a loving and supportive family when I was a baby and toddler. She said it was one of the most sorrowful days of her life. I also believe that she was a mother of love. It was very clear to me that she and her family loved me a great deal as a child, and that had not diminished in all the years that we'd been apart. Then there was my natural mother. She had a very tragic life. She struggled with mental illness and carried the sorrows of her abusive childhood and difficult marriage to my father. I call her a mother of sorrows because I don't think she ever was able to cope with either my older brother or myself, who were the children of her first marriage to my father, who she hated, by the way. And we had been separated at 6 months of age when I had a near-death experience, most likely at her hands when she was mentally ill. She was not allowed to contact me for many years, and I didn't meet her until my late 20s when my older brother Chris, her first son, and his wife came to visit me unannounced in Oregon. When they contacted our mother to say, "Oh, by the way, guess who I met?" she was quite unhappy about it, but we kept going and we kept in contact for many years until she broke contact a number of years later. My mother and I both loved cats, and I suspect that's one of the reasons to this day that I've always been affectionate towards cats. I also think that I triggered a lot of emotional issues for her in my persistent requests in my 30s and early 40s to learn more about my early life because I really did not know very much. As I said, she broke off communications with my older brother and myself and our stepbrother, who was the child from her second marriage, and we never heard from her again. And I only learned some years later that she had died. She hated my father, and I suspect she saw characteristics of him in me. A mother of sorrow, a mother of judgment, but also a mother of love. I think she loved me in a fragile way, but we never had a chance to really fully explore what our lives as mother and child could have been. Finally, I want to speak just a bit more about my foster mother, Selma. I mentioned her as a mother of judgment, of guardianship and law giving, and also a mother of sorrow. But in her own New England way, she was also a mother of love. I'd mentioned going to the coast with her to get some lobster, and her question about had she heard the word liberal in the service. And when we got to the restaurant, and I had told her a little bit about the service, and she had just nodded, we were getting ready to get out of the car, and she looked at me sideways, and she said, "Well, I just want you to know that you're a very good boy." And that sentence made all the difference in the world. We'd had a lot of hardship growing up, and she has very strong feelings about the way children should be, even if they were 50. But that term, "you're a very good boy," was her way of saying, "I love you." And to this day, I carry that forward rather than the judgments and harshness and anything else from her, from my mother of birth, Barbara, and my mother of love, Charlotte. So I hope that you can find some usefulness in these three stories. What about your mothering, or your mother's mothering, or your grandmother's and beyond? Judgment, rule makers, love, sorrow, perhaps all three. And I think all of our mothers have all three and more. So I hope you will take some time this Mother's Day to reflect on the gifts that our mothers have given to us, sometimes well, sometimes not very well, and try to pick the best and stay with that. Because I think when it's all said and done, like Anne Lamott says, they did the best they could, and even when they went into that far horizon of dementia or other reasons and left us behind, we still can remember them for the gifts that they offered us. So happy Mother's Day, blessed be, and may we all be well and healthy and whole. Chalice extinguishing and closing words. We extinguish this chalice, but remind ourselves that its light shows us the path to peace, the heart of joy, and the love of one another. It is always right in front of us if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. Happy Mother's Day to all who honor mothers in this world, and blessed be.